Hello everybody, welcome to Legal Dailies. Last week we talked about fundamental human rights under the Nigerian Constitution. Fundamental rights, we said, are those rights, your rights as an individual, your rights as a human, your rights as a person. And we said there are sets of entitlements that have been legally protected and provided for by the law. So last week we talked about right to life, right to dignity of human person, right to liberty, right to movement, right to freedom from discrimination, and a host of others. However, we also did mention that those rights are not absolute. There are certain restrictions, limitations, or exceptions, as you mean like, that have been placed on these human rights. So those rights are what we are going to be talking about today. So before we go into it, I would like to ask, have you subscribed to my channel? Please subscribe to my channel, like and follow our other pages. You following me motivates me to do more. Thank you. So let's go into today. So the first right we are going to be talking about today is right to life. Right to life. Right to life. Pardon my marker. I don't know what's. So right to life, and under right to life we have court sentence. We have court sentence. We have self-defense. We have suppressing riots. Or insurrection. So we are going to discuss this. So we said right to life. We said no person has the right to intentionally take a life of another person. So there are exceptions to this right. However, those are court sentence, self-defense, suppressing riots, or insurrection. That's not all, but we are going to be discussing these three. So court sentence, where a person has been charged with a criminal offense, this person has been taken to a court of law, has been tried and found guilty, and have been sentenced to death. The person at that point loses his right to life. That is a person that committed murder and have been taken to court. So self-defense here is a person has a where loss of life arise as a during the course of a person protecting himself from violence or his property. And the third one is loss to life arising from riots or insurrection. This is when there is maybe a riot or a mutiny, and the officers of the law are trying to suppress it. Sometimes we see situations of them putting shots in the air and resulting to certain loss of life. So the second exception we are going to be talking about is dignity of human person. Dignity of human person. So last week we said no person, this right to dignity of human person protects a person from being unlawfully arrested or torture or forced and subjected to forced labor. However, there are some situations where labor does not, that compulsory labor, let me put it like compulsory labor has to be compulsory, and then you cannot rely on violation of your dignity to human person or being suppressed to labor. And those are labor arising from labor by members of the armed forces. Members of the armed forces, court sentence. We also have court order. Let's say court order. We have compulsory national service. We also have labor arising from civil responsibility of members of a community. So the first one, labor required by member of the armed forces. You know, sometimes like let's take the army for example, where they will be asked, some of them will be posted to maybe to fight insurgency and all that. They do not have the right to say, okay, I'm not going. It is required of them as member of the armed forces. And also court order, maybe where a person has been charged to court and the person has been sentenced to, let's say, community service. Like, okay, maybe you have been guilty of a certain minor offense, and the court order is like, okay, sweep, you have to sweep the street or the main road, or you have to do this or that. Another one is compulsory national service. That is the NYC that most of us, as long as you are a Nigerian and you are under 30, you have to go for your national service. And during the course of your service, you might be called upon anytime to do some acts for the nation. We normally say we are serving our father's land. And the third one is labor arising from civil responsibility of members of a community, where perhaps some we see in small towns where sometimes maybe there is an erosion or such, and maybe the community leader of the community can say, okay, everybody should come out, let's pack sand, let's dig a certain thing or one thing or the other. That's about it. So the third right we're going to be talking about is right to own property. So we did say that every individual has a right to own property in anywhere in Nigeria. It doesn't have to come from that place to own property from the place, but there are certain exceptions to these rights, and one of them is compulsory acquisition. Compulsory acquisition by the government. Compulsory acquisition by the government. We have under this place, we also have temporary acquisition for environmental purposes. We have probably mortgages or mortgage. So compulsory acquisition by the government. So in as much as a person has a right to own landed property or immovable property in anywhere in Nigeria, there are situations where the government has a right to compulsorily acquire this land. This is, however, subject to payment of compensation. Under the Land Use Act of 1978, a government has a right to compulsorily acquire a land for overriding public purposes. What is overriding public purposes? That is maybe to acquire a certain land, maybe to construct a road, or for mining purposes, to build town halls, and just for the public district. And this can be found in section 28 of the Land Use Act of 1978. However, we all know the government officials have, in so many cases, even under the veil of compulsory acquisition, to acquire property for themselves without the payment of prompt compensation. And the issue of prompt or adequate compensation is another matter entirely. Sometimes they acquire this land without paying compensation. Sometimes the compensation paid are not adequate. So just have it at the back of your mind that there are situations where the government might have to acquire your property, but you also have a right to adequate and prompt payment of compensation for the land taken. And mortgages, a person might, where you use your title to your land, your document, your land document to get a loan from the bank. In situation like that, when you are unable to meet up with those loans, you might lose your right to that property. And at that instance, if you are not able to pay at the required time, you may not be able to rely on your right to own property. So the next right we're going to be talking about is right to freedom of movement. Right to freedom of movement. Right to freedom of movement. So yeah, a person has the right to move anywhere and to go to anywhere he wishes within Nigeria. However, there are also limitations or exceptions to this right, and one of them is environmental sanitation laws. Environmental sanitation laws, or for security purposes. So we all know, I think first sorry, pardon me, movement, environmental sanitation laws, security purposes. So like I was saying, environmental sanitation laws, they are depending on the states. We have situation where sanitations are fixed for a particular Saturday of the month, maybe the first or the last. Like in Kano State here, it's every last Saturday of the month, where you might not be able to leave your house before maybe before it's 10 a.m. Everybody has to stay in their houses. You don't have the right to open your offices, your shops, or your any place of business. So that is an exception to your freedom of movement. You cannot come. I know some people might like, I beg, I'm going out. They cannot hold me. I have my right to movement. You can't say you have your right to movement, because this is an exception. This is kind of actually higher than be placed a limitation on your right to movement. Another one is for security purposes. We say where for security purposes, for the protection of the citizen or individual, a state or a community might have to put in a coffee that nobody should go out. During this lockdown period. Yes, that's actually a very good example of right to freedom of movement and exception. Like during this COVID-19 period, nobody had the right. During those I think early part of this year, we all had to stay in our house. You could not say you have your right to movement to then you decide to go out of your house, or like in Lagos State when they did their 6 to I think 8 or 10, I can't really remember. If you go out within those COVID period, you have yourself to blame, or you have to answer to the consequences. So we are going to talk about right to personal liberty, but I have to clean this board. Sorry, I have to clean the board to have somewhere to write it. Right to personal liberty. So the fourth or fifth right, I don't know, I think it's the fifth actually. Right to personal liberty. And we said last week we said if this right basically protects a person from unlawful imprisonment or unnecessary limitation placed on the overall freedom of a person without legal justification. So under the restriction we have, under the exception we have same restriction on same-sex marriage. We have restriction based on age. we have lawful arrests. We have lawful arrests. Okay, so personal liberty, like in Nigeria, I know in other climes, like maybe in the United States, you can marry a person of two persons actually of same sex can marry each other, but under the Nigeria law, especially under the Same-Sex Marriage Act of 2013, no individual or no two individuals of the same sex are allowed rather to go into marital union. You cannot marry a person of your gender, maybe male to male or female to female. You cannot say, okay, I have my right to personal liberty, I can do what I like, let me just Tom is very beautiful, he's handsome, let's get married. No, you cannot do that. That's one of the restrictions. And based on age, okay, so there are some certain restriction that has been put in place based on age. There are some certain things that you cannot do when you've not attained a certain age, like in senile climes, maybe when you are not 18 or you are not yet 21, you might not be allowed to take alcohol. Maybe in Nigeria, okay, when you are not certain this age or that age, you cannot do this or you cannot do that. You cannot claim a violation of your right to personal liberty in this situation. And we have lawful arrest. Okay, so when you have committed a crime, you can and it has been proven that you did committed this crime based on the investigation by the law enforcement officers, you cannot rely on your right to personal liberty from being arrested. Lawful arrest and detainment, when a person has been found you cannot say, I have my right to personal liberty, you cannot take me away, you cannot do this. The only right you at that moment of committing that crime lost your right to personal liberty for a while, at least pending the court decision. So at that moment, what you have is maybe your right to fair hearing, to an interpreter, to a lawyer, to for your child to be read to you. Sorry, you lost at that stage. You lost your right to personal liberty. So the sixth right we will be talking about is right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So in our last session, we did said every individual has a right to choose any religion of their choice. You have a right to choose, maybe you want to practice Islam or you want to practice Christianity, and nobody has the right to force their religion on you. You have the right to practice, to manifest, and to change this religion you've chosen as at whenever you wish to change it. And this was also frowned against forced indoctrination of religion, a certain religion, on persons in places of education. However, this right is also not absolute. Yeah, it's not absolute. There's exception, there's limitation, and one of these is secret court. Let me say secret court. In as much as you have your right to practice any religion, in Nigeria, you do not have a right to be a member or aid or participate in activities of a secret court. Nobody is allowed to be lawfully, however, be a member of secret court. We know they do it actually, but lawfully you do not have the right. There have been restrictions placed on being a member or participating in activities of secret court. So these rights are not exhaustive. I know there are a whole order of rights that we've not talked about, but for now, this is what we'll be talking about. And right, maybe on our next session we might shed more light. And yes, if you want a written version of this session for your perusal or digestion at your leisure, you can go to our Twitter page at Legal Dailies, or our Facebook page at Legal Dailies to read them. And please please don't forget to subscribe. Please, why won't you even subscribe to my channel? Why? Please subscribe. By subscribing you motivate me and you push me to do more. Thank you for staying with us, and please always check up on Legal Dailies. So I don't know what we'll be talking about in our next class or in our next session rather, but within the week I'll bring it to our notice. You all have a nice weekend. Love you.